continuing in our series, Shaped by His Story. And I don't know, I've had a lot of fun with this already in learning that there's this connection from Genesis already throughout the entire book of Genesis. We're going to see as we get into Exodus, and we're going to go from Exodus to the book of Judges. And understand we're going to do this verse by verse this morning. So I hope you brought a lunch. And if we don't, let's hope there's a little boy with loaves and fishes, all right? All right, so this morning we're really going to focus on this theme of wandering in spite of directions. And, guys, we're kind of known as ones who won't ask directions when we're on a journey somewhere, right? Ladies, you recognize that. But ladies, I want to explain kind of what our mindset is so you'll have a better understanding on your next trip. So we know that the earth is round. And that if we just keep driving, eventually we're going to circle back and we'll come up to the right place, all right? And to be honest, we really get this from our dads. You know, they were embarrassed to stop and ask directions because, they didn't want to appear to be lesser than, they didn't want our moms to think worse of them. And they got it from their dads. And, even their dads and dads and dads, the Oregon Trail and all of that, we just didn't, and we continue on back through history, and you get back to Moses, and you find that Moses did a little bit of wandering himself. Now, the thing that we find out in Scripture is that Moses actually had directions, and the people had directions. It's just a problem that they didn't want to stop and use them. They didn't want to think about them because they thought they had their own way. If you remember last week, Matthew talked about the people of God. And we heard about that covenant that God established with the people of Abraham's family. And in Genesis 12, verse 2, he says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So there's this great promise that God was going to do something great among Abraham's family and make him into this nation that would bless the entire world. And so from Abraham we get Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob and Esau, and the Lord chose Jacob to continue on and renewed that covenant over and over again, renamed Jacob Israel. And Israel had 12 sons, and one of those sons' names was Joseph. And if you remember, Joseph was very instrumental and used by God to get the people of Israel, the rest of his family, to a place of safety so that they could survive a famine that was going on in the land of Canaan. And in Egypt, it was a land of plenty because God had used Joseph and given him wisdom to store up and make wise choices during the time before the famine came. So Egypt was kind of this power nation at that time. And they had all of this wealth and all of these resources. And Joseph was able to get his family down there, establish them into the land. And the thing that happened, though, is that they remained there. What may have been intended as a hiatus to just spend some time there for a rescue wound up being 400 years when they were in the land of Egypt. And when we think about this, the people, they began to, as the kings that knew Joseph died off, as Joseph died off, the kings didn't remember about Joseph. And they didn't remember about this great relationship that Egypt had with this family from Canaan. And the Hebrews began to grow in population. And what happened is that the pharaohs or the kings of Egypt turned this Hebrew population, this nation, into a slave force. They became enslaved by these harsh taskmasters, and they would demand these extreme and impossible work projects for the royalty in the nation of Egypt. Now, what happens when you suffer? Some of you just grin and bear it, right? But for many of us, what do we do when we suffer? We whine, we complain, we groan, we may cry out, we may, oh man, this is just too much for us. And that's exactly what the people of Israel did in captivity in Egypt. Let's look at Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. You can see kind of the condition that they were in 400 years later in Egypt. It says, years passed, in Exodus 2, 23 through 25, years passed and the king of Egypt died. But the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. God has preserved a man at this time by the name of Moses. And you remember, we all love the stories that we heard from childhood about how Moses, he was born into this household and rescued from the pharaohs at that time. Their plan to reduce the population was to kill baby boys, and Moses was saved through miraculous rescue. He grew up in the palace there in Egypt. But there came a time where Moses murdered an Egyptian and became a fugitive. And so this is after his first 40 years in Egypt. He runs as a fugitive from Egypt. He finds himself in the land of Midian. There he connects with a lovely lady and her family. He grows up there with his family as a shepherd in the hills of Midian. And then God meets Moses, kind of as he is going through his day, herding sheep. God, in this dramatic encounter with Moses, meets him in the form of a burning bush that does not become consumed. And it is there that God says, I'm going to do something with this man, Moses. Moses is the age of 80 at this point. Look at Exodus chapter 3, the next chapter over, verses 7 through 10. It says, the Lord told Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you, Moses, to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Now, following this passage, God and Moses kind of go back and forth in this dialogue of Moses' doubts and God's affirmations that Moses, you can do it. I'm here with you. I'm even giving you your brother Aaron to help you out. And Moses does eventually go to Pharaoh, and God shows his might and strength in 10 miraculous plagues to secure the release of the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. Now Moses begins the task of moving this nation of 2 million people at this point toward the promised land. Can you imagine you being qualified as a shepherd and God coming to you and asking you to navigate 2 million people anywhere. What a daunting task. But Moses goes and he sees the hand of God at work. And he sees after these 10 plagues that the people are moved out of Egypt. Not only do they leave Egypt, but they are giving so much loot to take with them. And they go out into the desert and they begin their journey. And you would think, boy, the people were probably just so ecstatic about getting out of slavery, and they want to go as fast as they can to get back to the promised land, right? But look what happens as they journey into the wilderness. The Hebrew people are dominated by fear and a lack of trust in God. We can see that in this passage in Exodus chapter 14, verse 10, we can see the demonstration of fear and mistrust in God right after leaving Egypt. I mean, just immediately after. In Exodus 14, verse 10, it says, as Pharaoh approached. Now, Pharaoh has decided, I made a mistake. I've let everybody go that was providing all this work for me. And he gets his army, his entire army, and he chases after them. And it says, as Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord and they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen when we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. And so you see the heart of the people, even before they left Egypt, there was doubts, there was fear of what was going to happen. And as they are encamped against the Red Sea with nowhere to go, and Pharaoh's army is coming down on them, they complain and cry out to Moses with this fear. But notice the reactions of the people. Let's continue. Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. And of course, we know that Moses, he takes all of this burden of the people's fear that's come to him, and he takes it to the Lord, and the Lord just says, stretch out that staff over the sea. And what does God do? He parts the sea. And not only does he part the sea, but he gives them dry land to walk upon to cross this sea. And as they get over to the other side, God releases the armies of Pharaoh to chase after them. And when Pharaoh's army gets into the middle of the sea, God allows the waters to go back, and the entire army of Pharaoh is drowned and destroyed. You see, the nature that we have many times is to fear and not trust God because of the things that we see around us, because of we see the dangers that we may see around us. But understand that God didn't say, I'm going to release my people Israel from Egypt to go out into the desert and die. That was the vision of the people. God's vision was what? To take the people from Egypt all the way back to the promised land. And when God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. It doesn't matter what types of things are in the peripheral that we might see or that are around us that may seem dangerous. And those things may even cause some harm to us. But when God's got his plan to move his people, nothing will stand in their way. It will be accomplished. But the people couldn't see that. Not only did the people, they had this domination of fear and lack of trust, they were dominated by an attitude of complaining. Listen to what happens in Exodus 15, verse 24. They had gone just not many days later. They had gone further into the wilderness after they crossed. And you know what? In the wilderness, you know what there seems to be a lack of? Water. I mean, you go out into the deserts even of America and you'll find, hey, it's kind of hard to find water. I mean, it's there if you know where to find it, right? But, I mean, here they are. They're going through this wilderness and there's no water. And they finally come to some water, but do you know what? It's bitter. And it tastes awful. And it's not good for them. And so look at what happens in verse 15. The people complained and turned against Moses in verse 24. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So again, Moses, a good leader. he's no waterman, right? He doesn't know where to find it. He goes to the Lord. He says, Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. And Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. Pretty simple, right? Take a piece of wood, throw it into the water. It's good to drink. Was there something magical about the wood? I doubt it. But did God want to show that he could be trusted to provide? Absolutely. And even when bitter water was found, God said, here's a plan. I'll take the wood, throw it into the water, and we'll be okay. Israel's strain throughout the book of Exodus shows up as this: complaining, fear, and testing God. When we stray, we have these things that happen to us. We have things that we kind of resort to what we have always been accustomed to. So if bad things happen to me and I'm a complainer, I'm going to complain about it. If the weather's bad in Conway, if it's hot and humid, you probably won't find me rejoicing, right? But you'll find me complaining about the weather. If the weather is good, but maybe a little dry, you know what? I won't focus on the good feel of the weather, the dry humidity, the dryness of it, the lack of humidity, but rather I will focus on what? That everything's terrible, that nothing's the way I want it to be. We tend to resort to complaining at times. Sometimes we become fearful. Now, I like to think that I'm a good driver, but I understand that there are times I invoke fear when I drive. And many times we kind of get in that mode of where we're afraid of things. What's going to happen to me if this happens? What's going to happen? And the voice of God in our ears reminding us of his promises, of his security, of his provision, of his care, it grows dim in the light of danger, and we grow fearful. We also contest God or disobey God in certain ways. And the people of Israel were like this. When God had instructions for them, they would disobey him. So, not only would you have complaining, fear, and testing God, these are all behaviors that highlight their human weakness. But they often characterize ours as well, don't they? And they not only highlight the weaknesses in our own human nature, but they also highlight to us the need for God's guidance, patience, and covenant mercy. God does this by establishing a meeting with Moses on Mount Sinai to give him a message to deliver to the nation. Let's read it in Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 through 6. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. And the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians." What's God doing here? He's reminding them, right, of what has already happened, of how he's cared for them. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. And he said to Moses, this is the message you must give to the people of Israel. So what he's trying to do here, he's trying to show Israel, look, if you look back to the past, remember right there, even at the Red Sea, as you came out and you doubted me? Remember when the water was bitter and you went complaining and griping about how terrible conditions of life were? Remember how I took care of you? You remember even in times of disobedience, how my mercy was there to continue directing you and guiding you? And then he says, look, you remember those things, but right now, if you will do this, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure. So God had made this covenant with the people. And if you go all the way back to where we were last week in Abraham's family, in Genesis chapter 15, we even saw that the demonstration of that covenant in a very dramatic way of walking between some hacked up pieces of meat, that God was the one who came and went through the middle of that covenant alone by himself. Abraham did not join him in that covenant because he wanted to demonstrate that it's impossible for people to keep the covenant. A covenant that God established and God himself keeps. So here he's saying, look, if you will do this, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure. You see, he's calling the people to himself to be a part of that covenant, to partner in that covenant along with him. To say, I've blessed you by establishing this covenant with you. Now, you need to walk with me. You need to follow me. You need to find purpose in what I have for you. Not only in the rest of Exodus, but also in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's my quick way of getting through the rest of those books. We have God revealing more of himself. He shows himself strong, and he shows himself mighty in how he provides for the people. And we see time and again how the people stray from God, but God in his mercy brings them back to him. That guidance is summed up in Exodus 20, and we know them as the Ten Commandments. If you look through the Ten Commandments, it pretty much sums up the law that God gives. Was that the only law that God gave? No, I mean, it's extensive. And if you want to have fun this afternoon, just start about Exodus 20 and read through the end of Deuteronomy and just kind of see and tabulate all the laws that there are that God gives the people of Israel to govern them, to help them to live socially with one another, to live in holiness with God himself. These are instructions for worship, and these all emphasize the holiness and justice of God. So here's the big idea I want us to see this morning. It's not that we don't have God's direction, but that our heart desires to stray from his guidance. Therefore, we will only experience the blessings of good choices when we yield our way to his. You see, there are many times that people called into a covenant with God will stray from that. And it's not that God says, hey, I no longer want you, or I no longer have a relationship with you. Once a relationship is established with the Lord God of heaven and earth, it is there for eternity. Once you enter into that relationship with Him, it is there. But when we stray from Him, we can't experience the blessings of what He's doing in our life. We need to be reminded often of that goodness of God, of the promises of God, and how He's kept us over and over again. From this big idea, let's look at some steps to avoid wandering. The first thing that we want to see and avoid wandering from God is to recognize that God has a plan for His people to walk with Him. This is found time and again in the fact that God throughout history has a plan for His people. And we've not only seen it from Genesis up to now, but we will continue to see this time and time and time again. His plan is still in play today, in fact, that He has chosen to have a relationship with those who belong to Him, His church. Using us to bring reconciliation between those without Him to Him, so that He can have a relationship with them as well. And as much as we enjoy our personal relationship with God and the blessings that come from our tie to Christ, we are missing the mark and falling short in that relationship when we focus on the blessing without the opportunity to partner with Him in His mission. God is on mission in our world right now. God is doing things right in our midst, right at this moment. We don't want to miss that. Recognize that God has a plan for His people. He has a plan for you to walk with Him. And then secondly, instead of observing God, live in a relationship with Him. Now, what do I mean by that? The people in the book of Exodus, the Hebrew children in Egypt, they had seen God's mighty acts of deliverance. They had tasted His provision, and they had heard His guidance. And they even pledged their allegiance. But time and time again, when real life came and knocked on their door, we find their devotion rather shallow. We can live observing all of the great things of God, but He wants us to participate in the relationship. And you know, it's not enough to serve in only the ways that are comfortable for us, but we need to see that service is in response to His plan and purpose for our lives. A relationship with Jesus says, I want to value you and love you. I want to align my life, my ways, and direction with your ways and direction. Let me ask you this. Have you been only observing God? Maybe just watching what's happening, watching what He's doing? You know, He desires so much from you than that. He desires for you to walk with Him, to walk in His plan for your life. And then finally, when tempted to complain, mistrust, or disobey God, remember your past with Him and His faithfulness to you. When we're faced with temptation, and listen, we always will be, right? Even Jesus, when He went into the wilderness and He faced the temptation coming out, you know, He faced and he was victorious over that temptation 3 times with Satan. But we're told in the Gospels that Satan left for a season. So you may have a great victory against temptation in your life, and you think, man, this is easy. I've got it now. And beware, because the tempter comes around quite often, right? And he knows how to get to us. So when God takes these people into the promised land 40 years later, they cross the Jordan River at flood stage, and yet another miracle of God. And, you know, there are times that we need to be reminded about how God has taken care of us in the past that will help us to face the stresses that we have right now. And he did this when he took them into the promised land. So they went into the promised land across a flooded Jordan. And God had instructions for Joshua, who led them across into the promised land after they crossed the Jordan. He said, hey, tell 12 people, 12 men from the 12 tribes of Israel to go back down into the Jordan River that is completely dry. Have them pick up 12 big rocks and put them on their shoulders, and have them come up out of the river, and on the side of the promised land, have them stack those rocks in a pile. I think that's kind of strange. Why did God have them do that? He says in Joshua 4, so Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He told them, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And he says, we will use these stones to build a memorial. And in the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them. They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. So when you are struggling with temptation to stray from the Lord, remember that others have been there before you. And God is faithful to be there in spite of your failures and victories. His desire is to work in your heart to continually make you more like Him. So look to what God is doing around you. Mickey, I appreciate you sharing your testimony today. It touched my heart to know and to see how God has worked in your life. And you know what? God has worked in your life differently than He has in mine. And for the other testimonies that we've heard throughout this past year, it encourages us to hear what God is doing in lives, how He's fought through difficulties and circumstances. And it encourages me to be strong and to know that God is faithful in my life as well. Now, just to get you ready for next week, in the book of Judges, we find these words, and we read them in our responsive reading. It said, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. So, don't you think the answer is a king? They had no king. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. That wreaks chaos and havoc, right? I mean, just think about it. If everybody in here today wanted to do what was right in their own eyes, first thing, we probably wouldn't be here, right? There are a lot better things that our minds can usually think of, especially on a Sunday morning when it's time to get up and go to worship. Or, mid-service, our stomachs tell us, there's a lot better things you could be doing right now than sitting right here in this chair. But you know, we're going to see the tension continues in the story. People trying to find what they feel like is best for them, in contrast to what God says, here is what's for you. Here is my plan for my people. We can wander often, but never say that we do not have directions, because God has given us plenty, and He wants us to follow Him in His plan. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, you love us, and you call us to your side to walk with you. You desire for us to participate as your people along with you in your plan. So we ask, Father, that you strengthen us in the days ahead, not to wander, but to walk certainly after Jesus. For it's in His name we pray. Amen.